Hello, and thank you for taking the time to watch another Sophia Polk Realty's Tips That Matter. Today I have with me a very special guest. His name is Mike Gandy, and he is the owner of Lighthouse Engineering here in Dallas, Texas. Mike has over 20 years of experience as a professional engineer. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you.
Wonderful. So tell me a little bit about your background and who you are in your company.
Yeah, thank you. Just before we start, I just wanted to thank you for the honor of being with you today. I work with hundreds of agents, and I think Sophia Polk is the class act.
Well, I appreciate that.
I enjoy being part of your team.
Thank you, and we appreciate you as well.
So you're right, I'm a licensed professional engineer. That requires a college degree, education, testing by the State Board of Engineers, and then continuing education to maintain the license.
Okay.
I have a bachelor's degree in engineering and a master's in engineering. And I'm the chief engineer at Lighthouse Engineering. We're based here in Dallas. I've been running that firm since 2005.
Excellent. Well, I know you've helped many clients of mine, and you're not just a single engineer. You have a firm with other engineers underneath of you, and you actually are a little bit more specialized. Tell me a little bit about like the forensics engineering and things like that you do.
Well, at Lighthouse Engineering, we have 4 engineers. We have 2 senior staff engineers and 2 younger mentoring engineers. We specialize in an area called forensics engineering, which includes things like construction defect, conflict resolution between homeowners or builders. We work with some insurance companies, 10-year structural warranty clients. Okay. And so we're kind of the problem solvers. The motto of our firm is, what happened, whose fault is it, and how do we fix it?
Awesome. So with that being said, is that a lot of residential or commercial?
It's both, light residential and commercial.
Okay.
Our firm doesn't specialize in design, original design. We're on the fix-it side.
Okay, perfect. Now, if somebody has a problem, when do they decide that they're going to call an engineer?
Well, that's an interesting question. Most people will see cracks in the sheetrock or cracks in their brick or maybe cracks in their tile. And those could be indicators of movement, but in my experience, the vast majority, 95% of the cracks that people are concerned about really are just normal age-related types of movement.
Okay.
What we call normal seasonal movement. And the vast majority of cracks in the sheetrock and in the brick, I talk about them like smile lines. As we move the same way every day, we get smile lines in our hands and in our cheeks. And the house does the same thing. That's just where it wants to move. They're like little smile lines. And as we get older, the cracks get bigger. The same with the house. Don't forget, houses are made out of building materials like bricks and wood and concrete, and those things move. They expand and contract.
Seam lines between drywall.
Between drywall.
Or trim pieces.
There's a lot of things that cause cracking other than foundation movement. Things like wind pressure.
Okay.
Differences in your HVAC, heating and cooling. Just the human activity, closing doors and in and out of doors, and teenagers banging the door.
Okay.
Banging the doors. Vibrations in the earth. The earth is vibrating all the time, and those vibrations travel through the structure and they cause cracks. So not every crack is meaningful.
Okay. So if someone sees minor settling cracks, like something that we would see on your hand, that doesn't necessarily mean their foundation is failing.
That's right.
So if somebody sees lines that are significant, when do you determine whether that is a foundation crack or whether it's not? I think you were mentioning there were 3 different types of cracks. Tell me a little bit about those.
Okay. In terms of brick cracks, I kind of say there's 3 kinds of brick cracks. There's diagonal brick cracks.
Okay.
Those are the ones that are at diagonal stair step. It doesn't matter if they go through the bricks or not. That doesn't matter. They're diagonal. Diagonal cracks usually indicate settlement, where the foundation is settling downward.
Significant movement, where there may need to be a foundation.
I wouldn't even categorize it as significant.
Okay.
It could be.
Okay.
Again, the vast majority of those are not significant.
Okay.
And then the other kind of brick crack is a horizontal brick crack, where a crack kind of follows a mortar line.
Left to right.
Yeah, right,
Okay.
like right along the horizontal line. Those typically indicate where the foundation is moving upward.
Okay.
Okay. And then the vertical ones that we see like under windows, the ones that are just kind of vertical, those are almost always just normal thermal expansion. The sun heats the brick in the afternoon, cools off at night, heats in the afternoon, cools off at night, and that thermal movement causes vertical cracks.
Okay. So the vertical lines are typically not usually a problem. The ones that are horizontal could mean that there is more going on with the foundation.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking about mostly foundations. In Texas, our soils are studied all over the world because they are what we call highly expansive clay. And clay soils are made up of very tiny little particles. And when our soils get wet, they tend to expand.
Kind of like a sponge.
Just like a sponge.
Okay.
And when they dry out, they shrink. And so when we talk about foundation movement, what we're talking about is the moisture content in the soils are changing, drying or wetting, and that's causing the foundation to move. And so that's the majority of our work in this area.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is if it is a diagonal crack, it's probably from a dry soil, and if it's a horizontal crack, it's from heaving, that's from water.
Could be, yes.
Okay.
That's the general idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about what heaving is. Because
Okay.
a lot of people don't know anything about heaving.
That's
There's
right.
any foundation movement, they think that the foundation failed and is cracked.
Everybody kind of tends to say settlement.
Right.
But in my experience, homes that are new, like homes that are within about the first 10 years, what we're noticing is that the majority of those homes suffer from upheaval, where a portion of the home actually moves upward.
And again, what you were talking about with clay, it means that there's more moisture,
Yep.
which means that it's moving and it's raising the property in that location.
Most of the time, that is because when the builder builds the new home, we plant the landscaping and the grass, and we extend the downspouts down, and we tend to overwater our landscaping and grass, and then the water from the downspouts come down, and they wet previously dry soils. So where the soils were drier, we wet them with our landscaping, and that causes the soils to swell. And that is a large contributor to the upheaval. The upheaval problem is a lot different than the settlement problem.
So is there something you can do if your home has heaving? I guess locate the water and reduce that amount of water.
That would be the first step, but it's more painful than that.
Okay.
Yeah. I wish it was that easy. With settlement, if the foundation settles, we can just pier it up. But we can't lower the foundation if it's heaving. And there are a variety of ways to lower a foundation, but they're unpredictable. So for example, we can reduce the water. And when we do that, we're affecting the soil moisture content, which could take years. It could take 5 years for that soil to dry out enough to actually reconsolidate. So if there were some things we could do to speed it up, that's a benefit. For example, it may be controversial in the engineering world, but I've recommended to plant red-tip Photinia bushes around the perimeter if it's heaved up. And my thinking is red-tip Photinia bushes are known to drink a lot of water,
Kind of like a cypress tree too.
They're like little
Yeah.
straws.
Yeah.
And, I mean, they drink a lot. And so I feel like they would dry out the soils quickly.
Have you had success with that?
I have had one success with that. But that's mostly because people seem to be reluctant to try it. They don't
Right.
like the look of red tips, that it messes up their landscaping.
But it's actually a good thought.
They would rather have a quick fix. But the problem is the quick fix, if you have a foundation that's upheaved, the only way to level it is to lift the entire house up to match it. And that's painful because the low side really wasn't moving, and now we're going to be lifting it.
Altering it when there wasn't a problem.
Yeah. So there's damage to plumbing and just doorways, everything gets to be a mess. So upheaval is a big problem.
So it's important to definitely watch your house, make sure that the watering is consistent in all areas. But
I like the way you said consistent. I wish I could get more agents to be knowledgeable enough to say it that way, because we've all been programmed to say, water your foundation. We've heard it 100 times. Water your foundation, water your foundation. But really, that's an overprescribed thing.
right,
Right? That's like the doctor, eat good and sleep right, you know?
right, right.
Watering your foundation can really be a detriment for a new home if you don't water correctly. And so you need to know what you're doing. One of the little tests that I use is called the Moist and Delicious test.
Okay, tell me
Okay.
about that. That sounds
Okay.
interesting.
The Moist and Delicious test. If you walk around your foundation and you put your finger in the dirt, if it's moist and delicious, you've got enough water.
Okay.
If it's dry and cracky and nasty like my cookies, you need water.
So if it has lines that you could stick a coin
That's
in,
it.
then
That's right. And those soils, they'll just be dry and hard and nasty. Generally, I wish people would say something more like, just water enough to keep your grass happy.
okay. Not too much, not too little, and then stay consistent
That's
with
right.
that.
If you've got a dry area over here where your grass is dying out and it's dry and nasty, you got to put some water on that. Maybe trim the trees a little bit to let some sunlight come in so you can water your grass.
Because your foundation is going to be suffering from
That's
that.
right.
Well, we talked about heaving, so let's talk about the settlement part
Okay.
and what's actually needed for piers.
Yep. So settlement, we have more settlement issues on older homes. And there's two reasons for that, a couple of reasons for that. In most of this area, builders, when they come into a piece of land to develop the lands, they'll cut the streets down low, and they'll take that dirt and they'll pile it up onto the lots to level the lot. And then they'll maybe pack it down a little bit, usually not well enough.
Right.
And then they'll build the house, and then they'll plant two cute little Bradford pear trees right in the front yard.
Right.
And they're really cute when they're little.
Right.
Those will tend to have an effect at about year 12. So
When they've gotten mature.
that's right. Like they're like teenagers. They have voracious appetites. Those trees drink water like crazy.
See, I didn't know that. You just taught me something else new today. I didn't know Bradford pears drink a lot of water.
They do. And at about the 12-year mark, they're drinking about 500 gallons a day.
Wow.
Combined with the front of the houses on that fill material that wasn't really well compacted.
Right, okay.
And when that tree drinks that water, remember the sponge, it gets shrinkier and shrinkier. They consolidate. And
The sponge gets
foundation
more dried
settles.
out.
That's right. Now, that's kind of where the water your foundation concept came into being. Is what they meant was water your foundation between those trees, and what you're doing is you're replenishing the water that the tree is drinking. That's what you're doing.
Okay.
It's not the physical root we're concerned about. People will say that they see roots. It's the water they drink. That's the problem.
Aha.
And so when we
Okay.
say water your foundation, focus on areas around trees, on the hot side, the west side of the lot, that dries
Okay.
out quickly. Focus on those areas that dry out.
So whenever you do an evaluation of a property and you determine that it does need piers, what happens from there?
Sure. Well, let's just walk through the process of since when we've seen the crack and we get concerned about it, how do we know that crack is meaningful or not? And the primary tool that we use is called an elevation survey. An elevation survey is where an engineer will go out to the property and draw a scale drawing of the home.
Of the perimeter.
Of the perimeter
Okay.
and the load-bearing walls and the locations of the plumbing, the bathrooms and washer and dryer,
Okay.
and we draw it out by hand on site. It's a great picture of the house with all the rooms
To scale.
to scale.
Mhm.
And we take measurements of the levelness across the whole slab.
Okay, and how do you do that?
Yeah, we have an instrument called a zip level, and we kind of choose a point in the middle and call it 0, and then we measure the elevation from that reference point. So we might be -2 inches over there, +3 inches over there, -1 inch over there, and then we'll draw what's called the contour lines, which kind of makes it look like a topographical map, like mountains and valleys. We've kind of seen those topographical displays.
I've seen you draw those many times before at homes.
So that gives me a sight picture of the shape of the foundation. And then I can mark the locations of those cracks with the knowledge of what the foundation shape is, and I can go, okay, that crack is because of this problem, and because this is only maybe -1 inch, that crack is not significant. Or if it was maybe down -4 inches, I might say that crack is significant. So it's the combination of the elevations and the distress that we put together.
Okay. So when does a number start looking significant to you? There's a tolerance, and when
There
does
is.
it start getting...
There is a tolerance, and it is a widely misinterpreted thing, even by engineers, and it's frustrating in my industry. And so I'll just spend just a minute and try to clarify what that means. So before I do that, let me talk a little bit about the difference between an engineer and a foundation repair contractor.
Okay.
Okay. And then that will lead me into the tolerance discussion.
Okay.
Okay. I am a professional engineer. What I don't do is foundation repair. I don't come in and give you an estimate to fix your foundation. So the discussion is the difference between engineers and contractors. I have no motivation to sell you anything. That's I'm going to get paid an engineering fee whether the foundation needs work or it doesn't.
You're a consultant for your professional opinion.
I'm a consultant.
You're not selling piers.
That's right. That's right. And the foundation repair contractor, they have a product to sell you, which is fine. That's their business. They do good work on the foundation repair, but they have a motivation to sell their product. Some are more aggressive than others.
And a small story, I had a foundation repair company come out and tell me a property needed 30 piers. And I hired you, it was my own home, and you came out, did a full evaluation of the property, and told me that the home needed 4 piers. So, with that being said, I knew the foundation company with their measurements were wanting to sell me their product.
Yeah.
Well in excess of, $8,000 when I really only needed 4 piers at the home. So I do understand that they are trying to sell their product.
That story plays out every day. And unfortunately, it's a perfect sales environment. Typically, it's a real estate transaction. They've got your buyer and your seller standing there. They've got your little crack on the sheetrock. The seller needs to sell. The buyer wants the repair done. It's a pretty easy sales environment. People are under duress. They're there's a lot of moving parts.
And a lot of times they're not knowledgeable and don't have the information of someone like yourself.
Or the time.
Yeah. Or
Typically,
the time.
these happens at the end of the option. The home inspector comes in the first couple of days. By the time I get out there, it's day 7.
Right.
Or the foundation repair guy gets out there, you've got like tomorrow. So you're under duress. And you know, that's just the way it works. The fact is, if you need foundation repair, those contractors are you're gonna pay for an engineer on the back end anyway. If you do need repair, they have to pull permits and they have insurance requirements, and they hire a third-party engineer to come in. So you're gonna pay for that on the back end. You would be a lot better off to just hire the engineer up front. If you need work, you've already got that report. Right. They'll take it off the price of their bid. It's just that way the engineer is working for you.
Correct. It also comes back to the concept that you said previously. If a home is heaving, one of the ways to correct that is to move a perfectly good foundation to match that heave level, but do you really want to move a perfectly good foundation? So it does come back to, if you're oversold piers, you're moving a foundation that doesn't really need piers, and you're messing with the soils and everything underneath.
Yep, that's right. That's one aspect of it. The more common thing is what I call chasing cracks.
Okay.
Okay, so chasing cracks, and I've been chasing cracks for years. It happens every day. You install some piers along the front right corner. Maybe, you know, the typical repair is about 10 piers, okay? And it's usually around one of the corners. So you do the front right corner. Maybe you lift it an inch. Well, you know, remember the soils move seasonally up and down all the time. And what you've done with those piers then is you've stabilized one corner. Well, the rest of the house keeps moving like it does every day with our smile lines.
Right.
Except now your crack appears over here on this left side, because now there's a pivot point.
Right, which makes sense.
Yep, and so you call the contractor back out. He goes, well, yeah, we need to put 10 more piers around the left corner. Great. Now the back of the house keeps moving like it always has. And now your crack is on the back corner, and you pier that corner. And then the crack moves over there, so you pier that corner. And you just chase those cracks all the way around. It would have been better off, even if it was down the 1 inch, to just leave it alone, work with some watering, try to rehydrate those soils, but just let the house move.
Right, right. That definitely makes sense.
The lead into the tolerance question was the discussion about the difference between engineering and contractors. And the tolerance is widely misinterpreted. You might have heard people say, well, we're allowed 1 inch and 30 feet. That's what people say.
I've heard it many times.
Yep. Well, ma'am, you know, you measured to be more than 1 inch in this 30-foot length. Yep. So, you know, we need to pier up this corner. That is absolutely the incorrect way to interpret that. The standard is 1 inch and 30 feet, but it's misinterpreted. It's not that you're out of level 1 inch over a 30-foot span. What that number really means is if you have the foundation and it's bent, I'm bending this foundation. See how it's bent? Mm-hmm. If I drew a line between the top and the bottom and I measured how much that foundation was bent, I'm measuring the bendiness. Okay. Not how much it's down, but how much is it bent. And it's that little distance between the curved foundation and the straight line. That's the measurement of deflection.
And that's what's really important.
That's what's important.
From our time
That's right.
together that I've learned from you.
So where a sales technique is you're down more than 1 inch and 30 feet, really the tolerance, if you really were deflected 1 inch and 30 feet, your measurements would be more like 3 inches, 4 inches
Negative.
negative.
Okay.
Okay, it takes -3s and 4s to get an inch and 30 feet. It's a lot more than you think.
Okay. So what I'm hearing from you and from my experience is if someone is noticing some cracks that are in their brick, interior, exterior, that are more than normal settling, or maybe doors that don't shut properly or windows that don't open, they need to consult an engineer before they decide to have a foundation company come out and give them a quote. They have to have an engineer's report for that foundation company to quote on and be based on, because it could be really detrimental to actually pier your house when it's not needed.
Could be. It is detrimental to install piers. I estimate 90% of the foundation repair that we do in this city is not needed.
Wow.
I'm
That's
saying,
a huge number.
I'm saying 90% of it, industry-wide, is in that category of smile lines, normal little sheetrock cracks, buyer-seller transactional sales.
And that's one of the reasons I'm actually doing this video with you and have asked you to take your time out of your busy day to share your knowledge with us, because I do see this every day. I learned it very early on when I was selling homes. When I first started with my real estate license, I had a handful of clients that needed some concerns answered. And instead of calling an engineer and paying the fee to have an engineer come out, which in the long run is very reasonable compared to having a whole entire home piered, but they would put together these quotes with really scary numbers, 35, 45 piers that are needed. And the more research I did, the more knowledge I had, I realized that I need to suggest to my clients to call an engineer to really see what's needed instead of calling a contractor and being sold something. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of really great foundation companies out there that are going to be honest and upfront, but there's also, just like everything else, buyer beware. There are a lot of contractors out there that do want to sell you their product.
And to be honest with you, a repair quote with 40 piers is actually probably more legitimate than the majority of them where it's only 10. I'm more leery about the 10 piers around a corner, because 10 piers around a corner is hardly even enough to do anything. It's not even enough to really make any effect at all. So when I hear 10 piers around a corner, to me that says that corner's down about an inch, maybe an inch and a half, and they're putting 10 piers around that corner. And contractors will sell that all day long. They do it all day long. And the problem is, it's these poor sellers who absorb most of that unneeded cost.
Right.
So I always coach, if I have an opportunity to talk to a listing agent, if your buyer's concerned about the foundation, great, that's fantastic. We will not negotiate on a contractor's estimate.
Negotiate on an engineer's report.
We'll negotiate on an engineer's report that's been estimated by contractors, even Steven.
Right. No, that's a good point.
But we're not going to take 3 estimates from contractors
and negotiate repair money or install piers that might not be needed.
That might not be needed. It's kind of like, and this kind of comes down to, if you're a homeowner and you have that little crack and it's down an inch and a half and you want to pier it up, that's great. You should do that. You're the homeowner. But I always consider when you're asking somebody else to pay for it, then it's different.
Right.
Right? If I'm asking you to pay for it, then, well, now wait a minute. You know, it's down 1.5 inches. That's pretty normal types of normal settlement. There's no reason why I should be paying for that.
Exactly. And that actually brings me to another point. I remember maybe about 1.5 years ago, you had come out to help a seller I was working with, because a buyer that was interested in their home had someone come out and measured their home, and the numbers were crazy with what they said the deflection was and how many piers were needed. Subsequently, I had called you. You had come out, you did the measurement, and the engineer did not take into consideration the fact that there were hardwood floors.
Oh, is that right?
In one area of the home.
Yeah.
So explain to me what that means also, so our viewers can understand that a little bit.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of aspects to that. I mean, if you have, remember we're measuring the levelness of the slab. But if you've got tile and hardwoods and carpet and sunken living rooms, all of that needs to be normalized out. In order to normalize the elevation measurements, we will add or subtract out the heights of the floor coverings. And that's really easy to do. One of the things that some foundation repair contractors will do is they will find the highest point in the house. And it might be way over here in this weird spot in this back bedroom where that's the highest point. And that makes all their other numbers look really low.
Oh my gosh.
Right? So they'll say, well, you're really, you're down 2 inches over here along this front. Well, that's because he happened to zero out on that high spot back there that made all these numbers look really low.
That seems so wrong and intentional.
They're not all like that. But I've been around long enough to see that the vast majority of them are. Typically the ones that you've heard about, and I'm just saying from the radio, we've all kind of heard of the big 4 or 5. They don't typically do that kind of stuff. But you do get that kind of stuff from the middle tier.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, which is why I want to give my clients knowledge on how to make the best decisions moving forward for their home.
Generally, for a normal size home in this area, I don't start to consider repairs as needed until my measurements are like -2.5.
Okay.
So when you get that contractor's proposal and you see a picture of your house and you see all those numbers, if you're seeing anything less than -2.5, that's an indication that maybe you're getting it sold. If you're seeing -1, -0.5,
right.
-1.5, keep some perspective. Like that's an inch,
Right.
right?
That's not a lot.
They'll pier. I've seen pier this up all day long.
Oh my goodness.
That's 2 inches. So we're not talking about a lot. We're not talking about a lot. So look for the -2.5s and worse.
And also, doing this for so long, and of course I'm not an engineer, but I can pretty much walk into a home and feel a floor moving, or see something significant and then feel a slope, or see a repair in drywall. But I mean, if it's 2.5, 3.5, a lot of times I think someone can actually walk a home or walk in a corner and feel it.
That's true. That's also the death trap.
Okay.
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 To all the home inspectors that are out there, that's the home inspector's nightmare. So kind of again with our little foundation here, there's 2 ways it can move. We talked about the bendiness.
Okay.
That's called deflection. And remember, we're measuring how much it's bent, not how low it is, but how much is it bent. The other measurement is called tilt. So this foundation can be tilted like that or like that.
Now, was it tilted during construction or did it tilt over time?
I very rarely go with it was built that way. I have before once or twice in like 30,000 inspections, and I have seen them built out of level, but that's so rare.
Okay. So what causes the tilt like that?
Well, that's a great question. Older homes, like in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, were built really flexible. They're not very stiff. And any little soil movement causes them to, they're like wet noodles. They'd move everywhere.
Okay, that's a good analogy.
Newer homes are a lot stiffer. They don't bend. Like they're deep and strong and stiff, and they don't bend. They just tilt. Right?
Ah, okay.
They don't bend. And so the tolerance for tilt is 1%. Now, in the engineering documents, the criteria says slopes become noticeable at 1%.
Okay.
Not in need of repair, that just slopes become noticeable. And that's true. In my experience, when I measure homes that are 1%, that's when I can start feeling them. But the problem is, you can have a home that's tilted, and on a normal size home, if it's tilted 1%, it's probably off level 6 to 8 inches overall. Okay?
Wow, that seems
That's a lot.
significant.
That's right. 6 to 8 inches are the kind of numbers that we talk about when foundations need repair. If we're talking about 1 inch, that does not need to be repaired.
1%.
Yeah. So, yeah. The problem is when it's tilted like this, notice that there's no stress on the foundation. Like the foundation is not bent. It's not being cracked. No,
it's not failing.
No doors are out of square, no sheetrock cracks, no brick cracks. The brick line is straight. Like when a house is tilted, there's very little distress. The whole house just tilts together.
So is there anything that you do to correct that?
The concern is noticing it, because when you're walking through the floor plan, unless you have a straight shot, sometimes it's hard to pick up on those slopes. You don't notice them. You're going down hallways, you're going into the bedroom, into the bathroom. You're not walking straight enough to
notice it, to feel it.
That's right. And there's no cracks. All the doors work. And it happens all the time.
And that doesn't mean there's a problem. It just means there's a tilt. Or does that mean there's a problem?
If it's tilted 0.3, 0.4%, that's probably okay. But if you're dealing with a 1% tilt, it's perfectly livable, but you will have a problem selling it.
So what do you do to remedy that? Do you tilt? Do you pier
well, you
the
would have
untilted side?
You would have to pier the entire house. You would have to pier the entire house.
Kind of, as if it was a heave.
That's right. Because it's also kind of like, and you can answer this question, is this side of this pencil high, or is this side of this pencil low?
To me, the side is high.
You don't know,
the right
though.
side is high. But it's like, is the glass half empty, half
That's
full?
right. I think this side is low. But my
So
point
raise
is you don't know if it's this side moving up or that side moving down. You don't know which way it's going. And so the only way to fix it, and the worst thing you can do, some contractors will come in and they'll want to just pier up right along the low side. You don't want to do that, because then you're actually bending it. If you tried to lift way out here, you're inducing bendiness, stress.
Adding stress.
The only way to fix a tilt is to lift the entire house up. That's when you get into your 50 and 60 pier counts.
Just on another note, insurance companies don't cover piers.
That's right.
So do you suggest people that live in the state of Texas to find an insurance company that does provide insurance for pier coverage?
Well, Homeowners insurance is a misunderstood thing. Homeowners insurance, they need sudden and accidental damage. They need a date of loss.
Right.
Okay? So if you have foundation settlement, that is not something that has occurred
Suddenly.
or accidentally.
Right.
Unless you have a massive plumbing leak. Right?
And that could have been over time from a foundation moving.
Yeah, there's some chicken or the egg there, but if you have a supply side plumbing leak and all of a sudden your water bill in July is $1,000 and you see cracks and your foundation moved, the insurance company will pay that because that's
not for
caused by a sudden and accidental plumbing leak. But what they will not cover is the cast iron drain pipe that's been leaking for 10 years, or that tree that's been drinking water for 15 years.
Right.
They're not going to cover that.
Right.
Now, most newer homes less than 10 years old will have a 10-year structural warranty. A warranty is different than an insurance policy. And the 10-year structural warranty will cover those kinds of things. Anything that causes the foundation to move a certain magnitude, there's a criteria, but if it moves a certain criteria, the warranty company will pay that for the first 10 years.
Let's talk about new construction for a moment.
Yep.
So a lot of times there's a 3-point inspection if someone hires an independent third-party inspector to come and make sure that the builder is doing as they're supposed to per code. Do you suggest having a structural engineer visit the property and do an inspection during construction?
Sure. I do. It doesn't have to be a professional engineer. There are a lot of great third-party inspectors. Generally, home inspectors are fairly well trained to look at framing issues or installations of utilities. Engineers obviously can too.
Okay.
But I would recommend some third-party oversight,
Okay.
whether it be an engineer, a general inspector, a code compliance. The city, the green tag from the city, really, they're not looking for things that you really care about. Right? The city's looking for safety stuff. Is the handrail banister safe?
The correct amount of inches in
That's
between
right.
each spindle.
Is the water meter far enough away from the easement? They're looking for city-related type stuff. They're not in there looking for, the quality of the installation. Right? People think they do, but they don't. So a third-party inspector will help with that.
Awesome.
But just as a side note, a benefit of hiring an engineer to do that is, we will take elevation measurements of the foundation as it was built. And so if we have problems in the future, we'll know what we started with.
And that brings me to a story
Okay.
where I had just recently sold a home that was probably 7,500 square feet. And a couple of tiles cracked. It was a very, very big home with a lot of square footage on the first floor. And a couple of tiles had cracked off of one little artery of the main foundation. And the seller said this was like this when it was built. We went back to the builder. The builder said this was probably built just like this because the tile cracked immediately and it may not have been level right there. And if an engineer had actually come out and measured that foundation during construction, when they resold the home, they could have pulled that report out and said, this was the measurement from when this construction happened, when this foundation was laid. They're the exact same numbers.
That's it.
There's not an issue.
That's a great point for any buyer or seller. If you can show your next buyer that the foundation is stable, that's the golden ticket. That's a great thing to do. So get an engineer to just take the measurements just so you can have them when you go to sell it.
Exactly.
Especially if you're buying a home that might have some foundation movement that maybe we decide not to fix. And maybe it's off a little more than normal, and as long as we can show that it's stable,
that's the key.
That's the key. So I've had buyers, they'll buy into a distressed property that's got some diselevation, and they'll hold it for a while, and they'll buy it at a discount because of the diselevation. They'll negotiate and say, you know, I'm willing to buy this thing, but the one down the street's perfectly level. I'll buy yours, but I'm not going to buy it at full market value. And then they'll hold it for a few years, show that it's stable, which is the most important thing, and then they'll tell their next buyer, yeah, it's a little off level, but, you know,
it hasn't moved and it's been stable.
And then they'll sell it at full market value. And so there are people who have that business model. They look for homes like that.
And stability is the key.
That's right. Stability is the key.
So sometimes a buyer will look at an engineer's report that a seller had, and the seller may have this report that says nothing is needed, it just needs some water around the foundation, and the home is stable, and as long as they water, it's fine. They come up with a plan. But sometimes buyers think that's a negative because they think maybe there was a problem. And I don't feel that way. I feel like it's going to the doctor's office and having a checkup, and it's in your file.
Yeah, if you have a seller, maybe they are concerned about something, but to me that shows a lot of due diligence on the seller's side to get that checked out. I think in this area, people are so accustomed to foundation movement, and they're so coached on that you know, we do have foundation movement. You know, it's important to get that checked, and that's a big thing around here, and I think most agents do a good job coaching their buyers that it's not really a stigma, I don't think, in this area.
I've also had some buyers that when they see foundation, they think, big problem, don't ever touch the house.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Man, it just, we've got to define big problem. Like, just because they have some repair contractor bid that's 10 piers around the corner for, you know, $4,000, that's not a big thing. That's not a major repair. I would rather just negotiate a little bit of market value because it may be a little low, and not actually put the piers in.
And see if it becomes stable
and
over
just
time.
see that way that, you know, you'll have some room in your budget to fix it if you need it, but let's not just throw piers at something.
Right.
But, you know, again, there's a whole market out there for people who buy off-level homes, and that's a good strategy. I think there's a really good business model for buying distressed foundations, and what I recommend is for an investment and then rent it out. You know, renters don't care if it's off level, as long as your door's open and closed, emergency egress. Renters don't care if it's off level. They don't love the home, right? Like
they're not purchasing it.
They're not going to buy it. They don't love it, right? So I have people that buy those kinds of homes, and they rent them out for a number of years to recoup their repair cost. Either they fix them at that time, or they just sell them, move them on. But there's a market out there for people to buy off-level homes.
It's a good thought for investors.
Yeah, it's a great model.
Okay, so let's talk about a slab foundation versus a pier and beam foundation.
Yeah.
And how do you inspect those? And tell me some pros and cons of each of those.
Well, the thing to remember, Sophia, is there really is no perfect system. They both have their own set of advantages and disadvantages, and there is no perfect type. Usually, pier and beam foundations are more level. Those piers on a pier and beam, they typically go pretty deep. They're usually pretty level. They don't have levelness problems. But they can have wet soils problems. Crawl spaces, things from like sprinklers or drainage or downspouts that go into the crawl space, plumbing leaks.
You don't ever really get to see those.
That people don't ever go into their crawl spaces,
right.
And they could leak. I've seen them leak for 10 years, you know. So on a pier and beam, the absolute most important thing is dry soils. Got to have dry soils.
Okay.
And good wood and good ventilation.
Okay.
It's not that scary down there. Homeowners can look in their crawl spaces on their own. Just get a great flashlight, maybe some coveralls. All you got to do is just kneel down into the
crawl space,
the little hatch. You don't have to crawl all through it. Just get down in there enough to shine your light around and have somebody flush the toilets, run the sinks.
And they're looking for water.
You're looking for water leaks. You're looking for rodents, weird smells. You're looking for big puddles of water over there. You know, people that might be living down there. These are things that homeowners can do. It's not scary.
Okay, so another question. If a foundation measures level, but on a second floor, it slopes. Tell me your thoughts on that.
We get that a lot. What that is usually is where, you know, we have a lot of open floor plan concept, and so we have long spans of ceiling joists and beams that span way across the rooms, and you don't see all that, but there's structure up there. And what normally that is when you're upstairs and you walk from a stiff wall downstairs into an area of framing. And what you know, wood bends, and it's allowed to bend some. And so when you're standing right here on the top of this wall, it's stiff. And then when you walk into the room, you walk into framing. And it feels like they're sagging, but really what the feeling is it's just less stiff.
I'm so glad you answered that question, because it is a huge question that a lot of home buyers and home sellers have, and everyone thinks it's a foundation challenge.
That's right.
It's a big myth.
It's just kind of walking from stiff wall to framing. And what we try to do is, like, if your floor joists run kind of parallel to the wall, you feel it more dramatically than if your floor joists run into the wall. When they're running into the wall, you kind of walk up, you walk out, and then you feel it slowly. But when they're parallel, there's a bigger difference.
Significance, yeah.
Yeah, so it's usually just the feeling. Kind of getting back to your tile question, I really want to address that, your cracked tile example. I make a fortune off tile cracks. I love them. Okay?
People see a floor crack and they think it's a foundation issue.
Let's just admit it. It's a business, right? and I get called out on a lot of them. I hate to say it because it's like a significant part of my business.
Well, someone and this is why I want to educate the viewers, because small things may not warrant having an engineer come out and look.
And you'll know these cracks. The homeowners will always say it. This crack goes through my kitchen, it goes through the hallway, then they'll walk around, it goes through the master bath, right? So it goes all the way across. And so they'll say things like, my house is cracking in two, and it's cracking in half, and you know. But
please help me.
Yeah,
please help me. My house is falling apart. What do I do?
What do I do?
Big span of crack tile.
So we take the elevations, and in almost every case, the elevations are perfectly level. And you go out, if you go out into the garage and you look at the exposed concrete, there'll be cracks in the concrete. There's cracks in every concrete. So I'll take them out to the garage, and I'll say, you know, see that little crack right there? Well, that same crack is in your foundation, just normal drying. And then we put brittle tile over that crack.
A hard material.
A hard, brittle ceramic tile.
Right.
And again, with the earth vibration, the vibrations run through that concrete. We just don't feel it, but they're there. And then the vibration gets to that little crack, and it cracks that tile. And they'll crack right along that drying line. It's just a perfectly normal, caused from vibration.
You probably don't get as many phone calls from people that have wood versus
Right.
tile,
That's
because there
right.
may be some movement going on with
You're
the
right.
tile, but it's more flexible and has
That's
more
right.
give
That's it.
than
Tiles just crack.
tile.
That's the only time that a tile crack is significant, which is very rare, is if the tile is actually displaced.
Aha. Okay, so that would be something good for me to share with
That's
clients
right.
when they're looking at their tile, debating on whether they're going to call
If
an
you're
engineer.
rubbing across the crack and it's flat like that, that's perfectly normal vibrational movement. If it's
Raised.
if it's raised, that's a concern.
Okay. So retaining walls definitely are in some properties. So when should a seller or a buyer call an engineer to evaluate that retaining wall?
Immediately. And when I say that, new homes.
Okay. And why is that?
Yep. In my experience, foundation problems associated with retaining walls usually happen in the first 5 years. And that's usually because when they build the retaining wall and they backfill the soils, they don't compact the soils very well. And then they build this heavy house on those uncompacted backfill soils, and they compress over time. The weight of the house will settle. And that usually happens in the first 5 years.
Okay, so what if the pool is the closest thing to the retaining wall? Still the same thing?
Still kind of the same thing. The rule of thumb on retaining walls is the imaginary 45-degree line. So if you see your house or your pool and you take an imaginary 45-degree line from the foundation or the pool, and you take that 45-degree line and you side it down, if that line intersects any part of that wall, then that wall is structural.
Okay.
Okay? The vast majority of retaining walls around here are landscaping walls, which means that the 45-degree line, the retaining wall is out here, is outside of that line. The house is perfectly happy sitting on a 45-degree cone of soil. But if anything disturbs that cone, then the whole cone falls apart.
Right,
Yeah,
that makes sense.
That's right. So as long as that wall is outside of that zone, which the vast majority around here, the only real retaining walls in our area, there's some in Cedar Hill, there's some in Kessler Park, maybe a few in Highland Village.
Okay.
But those are really the only places that we get real walls.
So there's a handful of neighborhoods that kind of have a stigma that there has been a lot of movement. So is it a good idea to suggest to any buyer looking in those neighborhoods to get an engineer to come out and do their evaluation, or should they get their home inspection and decide whether the home inspector has suggested?
Either way, home inspectors are generally pretty good. They're very conservative. So a home inspector, if he sees any little crack, he's going to mark it up. So they are very conservative, and rightly so. You know, they're required to have insurance, and they're not going to take any risk on that.
Right.
Right.
They're going to want the home buyer
That's
to
it.
know of anything that they saw that could be a possible
A home inspector's
problem.
never going to look at a brick crack and call it good. Right? If it's a brick crack, it's going in the report and it's going to be heavily evaluated every time.
Which leads to?
Which leads to bringing the engineer out.
Exactly.
And it's because some of those neighborhoods, and agents know which neighborhoods those are, and just because they do have stigma, they have historical, people know that they're known for movement. You got to get those checked, because remember, you got to sell it.
Definitely.
You know.
Okay, so I have another question for you, Mike. At what point does a home buyer decide that a foundation is beyond repair and is a bad decision to purchase?
I tell them that.
Okay, so you're up front and you tell them it's going to be a lot of money to get this property to be level, stable.
I do. A couple of times, I don't know. usually just say it right out, like just pay me and run. I do a couple of times a year. I will say that. And I look at the client. You know, cute, young married couple, young baby, buying this crappy foundation house. I'm going to tell them.
Perfect.
Don't buy this. This is not for you. You know, investment guy that's going to rent it out, buy it. You know, it depends on the client. But I tell them if this is not a good thing.
So you're pretty upfront with the
I'm
clients.
right up front, and I've, you know, and agents, they grumble, but usually they're pretty appreciative, you know.
Yeah. Have you ever seen any foundations in residential real estate here in Texas that you have not been able to make a suggestion that would have it be fixed?
Absolutely. Even just one earlier today.
Oh, really?
It was a mid-70s slab. It was off a total of about 8 inches.
Wow.
You know, again, kind of going back to the wet noodle analogy, it's hard to lift a wet noodle.
Right.
You know, it's hard to,
Right.
they're not stiff enough to warrant piering, you know, and so you lift one edge and they, you know, there's just no budget. It'd be a $30,000 repair. There's no budget in it. It's so risky. What I really love to say in those situations, I use the cost risk benefit analysis.
Okay. And what is that?
Well, it's not scientific. It's just a way to kind of talk about the cost risk benefit of lifting this mid-70s slab, and it's does the cost and the benefit make sense? You know,
For the risk that
for the risk that
you
you're
might
going to
spend
take.
$30,000.
Yeah. And so it might be a situation where, look, make sure your emergency egress doors open and close. Fix your plumbing. Like, spend money to fix plumbing. Don't spend money to level it, but that plumbing's got to not leak. So that's the most important thing. I would much rather people spend money on plumbing leaks than foundation repair. And I'll tell them the options about renting for a while or just selling it to an investor. You
That
know,
somebody else can take
Yeah.
that risk on.
you got a $30,000 problem. You know, you might not be equipped to deal with that. But this guy that buys these things every day, he can come in here and bang that thing out and fix it and good enough to rent it.
Right.
And he's willing to buy it at a discounted price, and so, you know, there's all kinds of options. You're never without options.
Awesome to know. So I want to take a minute and talk about hydrostatic tests.
Yes.
So we talked previously about having an engineer look at the property prior to having a contractor look at it. Having engineer look, give their report, have the contractor bid based on the engineer, do the work, and then do what's called a hydrostatic test. So explain to me, I know what a hydrostatic test is because I've had handfuls of them done myself, but explain to our viewers today why that is so important and what it is, because this might be the first time they're even hearing these words.
The most neglected system in the house is the plumbing. The poor plumbing system doesn't get any attention.
Which could be the most costly and damaging
It
if
could
not
be. It could
addressed.
be. Plumbing leaks almost always happen on the drain side. So you don't see that in your meter. If you go out and look at the meter, they're not leaking on the supply side. They're leaking on the drain side.
Yes.
Almost always. And so they can go for years and you don't know. Again, we talked about when soils get wet, they expand. Well, if there's a leak in a local area, like around the bathroom or the washing machine, where that water is getting into the soils, it can heave a little area around the foundation from a plumbing leak. And so a hydrostatic leak test, I call it the yep, nope test.
I like that term.
Okay, it's either yep, it's leaking, or nope, it's not. Right? All they do, in the plumbing pipes, they'll block off the drain and they'll fill it up with water. They'll drink a beer for 10 minutes, and if the level in the pipe goes down, it's leaking. If it stays up, it's not leaking.
It's holding
yep,
water.
It's either yep or no. Right?
Exactly. And these are very important after having foundation work done, because if they're raising a side of the home or the whole home and the plumbing has broken at some point, somebody doesn't want to have their foundation fixed and then all of a sudden have a problem with their plumbing leaking.
Anything 1980s or older, you really should have a hydrostatic leak test done every few years.
Okay, that's good to know.
Because they leak, and they cause a lot of problems.
And why is that when you mentioned 1980s?
Yeah, there was a shift. 1980s and older, we used primarily cast iron drain pipe. And cast iron drain pipe rusts. And when it rusts, it leaks. And they don't just leak in one little area. They corrode the entire length of the pipe. And that's a very costly repair, you know.
Right.
I mean, it's easy to fix a little leak at a local spot, but that's not how they fail. They fail along the whole length. You know, you gotta keep those monitored. After 1980, we went mostly PVC, and PVC doesn't corrode.
Hydrostatic tests, in my experience, can run from $250 to $500. Is that what you've seen with professional plumbers?
If it's a YEP, then you might need the it's leaking right here test, the isolation test. Okay.
Okay.
So the YEP nope test is just, if it's nope, then great. If it is, then we've got to find it, and you need an isolation test. And sometimes that can be a little more expensive because different techniques, they've got to find where it is leaking. Now, sometimes, as an engineer, when I take my elevation survey, if there's a high spot right there around that bathroom, then I can pretty much tell you it's leaking right there, because that's where the water's coming out.
Exactly. You know, that makes sense.
I can kind of see it in the elevations sometimes.
Okay.
But overall, I would much rather people spend money to fix a plumbing leak than foundation repair.
Awesome. How do you feel about drip lines around a foundation?
Drip lines are great. It goes back to the overprescribed watering your foundation. If you do a drip line and you kind of don't know what you're doing, you really could be causing a worse problem. You could be watering an area that's already too wet and making that upheaval worse. And so drip lines are great, but you need an elevation survey first, and you need to know where to zone it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Great information.
And one more thing about soaker hoses, they're great. And you remember the moist and delicious test.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an area that's hard, nasty, and dry, you know, put some water on those. Now, I don't recommend those black soaker hose that people always get from Home Depot. One is they only last about a year. They get damaged by landscapers. They dry out in the sun. And then people don't use them. They just throw them away. Really, a much better thing that's really not that much more expensive is that plastic Rainbird pipe. It's at Home Depot.
Okay.
They have little nozzles about every 16 inches, and it's a hard plastic pipe. And you just bury that into the soils about 4 to 6 inches. You just take a shovel, you know, like a shovel trench, and push that plastic pipe into the soils around between the tree and the foundation. Maybe loop it around a couple of times.
Okay.
And then you get a timer from Home Depot and set it, you know, an hour a day or whatever. But that plastic Rainbird pipe will last 5 or 6 years, and it doesn't get damaged, and it more effectively waters the soil.
Aha. Yeah. Okay, that's a great tip.
The important thing is, I feel like foundation repair overall is a pretty oversold thing. The industry 20 years ago was engineering led, where engineers would go out and they would initiate the repair process. But then there was a shift where the foundation repair guys came in with their free estimates. And so people went with the free estimate
Instead
route.
of calling a professional.
Instead of calling the
and
engineer,
paying for that.
they would go for the free estimate.
It's lowered the barrier of entry for people to feel like they can have this company sell their piers. They have all of the fancy equipment. I've seen them come through with their tools and their equipment to be able to measure and
yeah,
decide.
They'll measure it. But that little old sheetrock crack, where engineers used to say that's fine, now they're pairing that up, and now we're all programmed. Oh, that little crack, that's going to be foundation repair, and so our tolerance of sheetrock cracks is so low. Any little crack, and we think that's
right. Exactly.
and it's not. And the vast majority of cracks are really just fine.
It's what they are. They're cosmetic cracks.
Little smile lines, right? And yeah, you might paint it. We put makeup on every day, but we get our smile lines back every day.
Exactly.
Put a little paint on it, it may come back.
So just because you have a small crack in your sheetrock doesn't necessarily mean, or even in your tile, doesn't mean that your foundation is failing.
That's right. In fact, very rarely does it.
Okay. Such great information.
Yeah. And again, with the engineering, like for a typical slab, we're $500. But if you do need repair, those contractors, they're going to turn around and you're going to pay for that on the back end anyway.
So in my experience, piers can cost anywhere from $200 to $250. So if a homeowner is being oversold the amount of piers that they really need, having an engineer come out and evaluate really pays for itself.
Save you one pier, you know.
Exactly.
That would be enough.
And it's also something where you can kind of equate it to going to see the doctor and taking medicine, opposed to going to a pharmacy, asking someone there what to purchase, and they give you some medicine without actually seeing a professional doctor.
Yeah, that's true. And really, the real benefit particularly for real estate agents and at the ends of these short option periods is if you have an engineering report, you can get 10 estimates just like that over the email. Email the contractor, they'll bid right from an engineering report. They'll all bid even Steven on the same report.
Right, exactly. So if you have an engineer's report, they can bid on that.
They
don't have to go back out to the home. They don't have to remeasure.
You can email 10 of them and get a bid back from 10 contractors overnight. People's homes, and they'll have stacks of contractor bids. They've called 30 of them. There'll be a stack like that. I'm like, oh God.
And they're contractor opinions.
And they're all different, you know. And that's interesting. Like when you really don't need work, they'll all be different because they're all doing something a little different.
Right, right. It's kind of well. That's why I'm so excited to have you here, so that we can educate people on the myths and the do's and don'ts, and why to call a professional engineer like yourself and your firm.
So anyway, that's there's a lot of information there.
All so helpful to anyone watching.
It's like any industry, any professional. Their industry is very nuanced. There's all kinds of little hidden thing, the way the industry works. And to an outsider, there's a lot of things that people don't understand. So I feel like hiring an independent engineer is always the best option. So
I do as well, and having that consultative approach, and it's very reasonable. Sometimes home sellers and buyers think that it could be thousands of dollars to call an engineer, and it's not. It can be $500 to have your home and slab or pier and beam foundation looked at, but it's definitely, in my opinion, valuable money spent. I
agree. Well, Sophia, that's kind of all I've got for today. My firm is Lighthouse Engineering. You can find it on the Google. It's just lighthouseeng.com, as in lighthouseengineering.com. By the way, you might not have noticed this before, but if you go to the website, Lighthouse ENG, there's a little audio thing at the bottom, and if you click on it, it kind of goes through this similar stuff.
Awesome.
Again, but it was a professional voiceover that did it. It's really good. It's designed for the client that says, I don't want to spend 500 on an engineer. Why do I spend 500?
Let me do some research.
Go to this website, watch this audio thing, and it tells them why.
Awesome.
But anyway, just again, I wanted to reiterate my thank you to Sophia Polk Realty.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm honored to be one of your referrals.
Thank you. You've just been a plethora of information for all of us today. So we've been very excited to have you here. And of course, I always learn something new when I spend time with you. So you've taught me a few things today as well.
Awesome.
Thank you again for coming by and for being on our videos.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you would like to view other helpful tips, click here. If you would like to view a neighborhood we specialize in, click here. And to subscribe and stay updated, click on the circle below. Thank you so much and have an awesome day.